Well, I had to get my fix of obscure movies somehow. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. I released parts 1 and 2 of this 3-part summer Blu-ray haul over the last few weeks, and now it's finally time for part 3. While part 1 had a mix of standard releases, and part 2 was exclusively Criterion's, this third part is going to consist of Kino Lorber releases, and a handful of Cohen Media releases. These were all purchased during Kino Lorber's June Swoon sale, which, despite the name, actually extended into July. Of all of the summer's hauls, I think this is the one that has the most unique assortment, and certainly the most obscure films. There are some pretty big name ones in here too, but I have a feeling that the majority of these may be new to you. I know they are to me. There are only a couple here I've seen before, so most are blind buys. Be sure to check out the description of this video for links to buy all of the Kino Lorbers I'm going to be talking about. They're affiliate links, and I earn a small commission if you buy anything using them, so I'd really appreciate it if you would use them. Alright, let's take a look at these Kinos. So first up here, we've got After the Fox. So this is a crime comedy from 1966 that stars Peter Sellers. So this is one that I have not seen. It's a blind buy for me. But I know he plays a thief character called the Fox. And supposedly he kind of does this classic Peter Sellers thing of costumes and kind of multiple types of characters in this. So it looked kind of fun. It looked like an interesting little crime comedy. Interestingly enough, though, this was also directed by Vittorio De Sica, who in part 2, when I was talking about Criterion's, was the one that directed Bicycle Thieves. So I have a feeling these are quite different films, this one being much more of a comedy than Bicycle Thieves was. Next up, we've got Alphaville. So this is a Jean-Luc Godard movie in 1965, one that I have not seen either, and it seems like it's very interesting and maybe very unique for a Godard movie. And so basically, we've got a character here who is sort of a kind of detective type character, or like a private eye kind of guy, or like an agent of some sort. And this is set in the future, and so we've got kind of this futuristic sci-fi city, and so it's sort of a futuristic take on a crime noir, but it's a 1960s French film. And so it seemed like a very unique combination. And I've heard, like, I've seen the name around on lists of movies before, and I'd been meaning to actually check it out, so now I've got the Blu-ray. Next up, we've got An Inspector Calls. So I think there are a few versions of this movie, a couple remakes, but this is the 1954 version. Again, a blind buy for me, but this is directed by Guy Hamilton of James Bond directorial fame. He directed Goldfinger and 3 others from kind of the early mid-years of the Bond franchise. So I'm kind of interested to see another film by him. But basically, this one seems like it's going to be a bit of a murder mystery type of movie. Basically, we've got these characters who are all at sort of a dinner party, and this inspector shows up, this police inspector, kind of detective, shows up to try and solve a murder, to kind of tell them that this murder happened, and they're all suspects, basically. They all have some sort of connection or some reason as to why they wanted this person dead, or kind of maybe how they were able to kill that person. So it seemed like an interesting murder mystery, so I wanted to check this one out. This next one's a little strange, and that's The Atomic Cafe. And so this is a sort of documentary from 1982. However, I believe pretty much all of the footage from this movie is much older. So coming from the 40s and 50s and kind of the Cold War. And so this is sort of this combination. It's a documentary, but also includes a lot of like old commercials and instructional videos and sort of nuclear atomic war propaganda films and kind of this weird mix. So supposedly this kind of has this darkly comedic juxtaposition of certain things with some really brutal and just dark stuff. But it sounded very unique, and so I don't know. It caught my eye when I was looking at the movies up for sale. So I'm very interested to kind of see what this one's all about. So now we've got one that I actually have seen. So this is Bacaro, and this is fairly new. This came out in 2019, and I actually watched it at the very beginning of this year because it was included in some for your consideration screeners, actually, that came from Kino Lorber. And so I did watch it, didn't end up reviewing it, but I liked this one quite a bit. It's a Brazilian movie, I believe. Yes, Brazilian, and it's sort of this neo-western, but with this weird twist to it. It's kind of got some crime elements. It's kind of maybe got some sci-fi elements to it. It's a very wild movie and also very brutal. It's pretty much one of those types of movies that if you haven't seen it, it's really hard to describe, and it's kind of difficult to even know what it is when you're going into it. So it's most likely going to surprise you. But I really enjoyed it. Again, like I said, I watched a digital screener, and so when Kino put it out on Blu-ray, I was excited to be able to pick it up so I can have it to rewatch as much as I want now. Next up, we've got another movie that I have seen before, and that is Battleship Potemkin. So this is very old, kind of a classic film. So this is 1925. It's a silent movie. And it's kind of about this military, not really coup, but mutiny and a rebellion that it sparks. So it's a Russian film. And like I said, I have seen this, but it's been such a long time. I watched this in a high school film class, and we were really looking at kind of the use of narrative through, or the way that they were able to portray narrative and really create an engaging narrative, even in spite of not having sound. And so this was one of those films that's really early and influential case of using a montage. So there's a very classic sequence on a set of stairs, and there's this baby cart, and there's this whole thing. And so this is one of those ones that's a big deal for film and just kind of the history of film, and so I was really surprised to see it as a Kino movie, but I wanted to pick it up because, again, I haven't seen this in so long, and I'm really curious to see kind of if my thoughts on it have changed at all over the decade and whatever since I last saw it, so curious to check it out. Next up, we've got Black Sunday. And so this is a sort of horror movie, kind of horror, thriller, gothic sort of curse movie about a witch. And so it's sort of like it's like a gothic artsy film. And so this is directed by Mario Bava, who has put out a few other ones. I've done actually a review of one of his films a couple years ago during 13 Nights of Halloween, Black Sabbath, which was actually a couple short films, a couple short stories put together. But Black Sunday is one that I haven't seen. Came out actually before Black Sabbath, and so that, I believe this is in 1960, and that one was 1963, I think. So very curious to check this out and see one that's more of a complete film rather than a collection of short films. Next up is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. So this is another very influential silent film, another one that I have seen in that same film class in high school, but one that I have not seen in a very long time. So this came out in 1920, and is kind of the classic example of German expressionist filmmaking. So it's got these crazy angles, and it's this very stylistic type of story. And so, or type of, art design, set design, that kind of deal. And so, again, I haven't seen it in so long, and when we did watch it, we were very much focusing on kind of the style and the influences it had on later films rather than the story. And so I'm curious to rewatch it and see kind of what the deal is with the story and how much of it I actually remember. Next, we've got The Day the Earth Caught Fire. So this is a blind buy for me, and it's actually a movie I had never heard of before this June Swoon sale and noticing it on the list. So it's from 1961, and it's basically sort of a doomsday disaster movie. And so there's sort of an unintentional nuclear war that gets set off, and it like knocks the earth off its axis, and so if everything's going crazy, there's all these other natural disasters going on in addition to the nuclear disaster. And so it's basically this story about people trying to survive and trying to save the world and trying to get it back on its axis and all sorts of things. So I tend to like disaster movies, and this is a semi-early one, right? When we think of disaster films, they really started to pick up in the 70s, and so this is about a decade earlier. And so I'm interested in seeing kind of what's going on with this film. Speaking of disaster films, we've got another one, an even older disaster film, another blind buy for me, and this is Deluge. And so this is from 1934. So it's among the earlier disaster films. I have another one that's very old. I don't think it's right here that I can grab, but it's called The Hurricane. I believe that one's from 1927. And so that's another kind of influential early disaster film, but this one, 1934, and the disaster here is kind of this giant tidal wave, and so an earthquake that sets off a giant tidal wave that basically comes across the whole U.S., right? It wipes out the country, wipes out New York City, and so then it's the aftermath of that and various people and groups trying to survive. And so an interesting thing about this movie that I saw when I was kind of reading up on it a little bit is that for a very long time, it was considered a lost film. And so I guess shortly after it came out, right, like it was just hard to come by. All of the original copies of the film were thought to be lost. In the early 80s, I think 1981, they discovered a dubbed version of the film. I think it was an Italian dubbed version. So they had the actual film, but they didn't have the words, right? They didn't have the soundtrack and all of that stuff, at least not in English. But a couple years back, I think 2016, 17, they finally found this like old copy somewhere that was actually had the original English dialogue. And so Kino restored it and put this out. So that's kind of cool. I don't know how the movie's gonna be, but I really like coming across some of these movies that are or had been lost films that now get Blu-ray releases of all things. Next up, we've got The Hot Spot. And so I believe so far this is the newest film or the most recent film, but it's still, a little old. It's as old as I am. So this is a 1990 film directed by Dennis Hopper, and it's kind of this neo-noir kind of story. And so it's this guy who's like a bank robber, and he uses this woman as his alibi, but then he kind of has trouble with that woman and, whether or not she's going to continue to be his alibi. And so it sounded interesting. It's one that I haven't seen, but sounded cool. And it's kind of one of the rare Kinos that has a slipcover. It's still in the plastic wrap, so I can't, I can throw it though. I can't really pull it out and show you without taking the plastic off, but it has a slipcover, and I'm a fan of slipcovers, if you couldn't tell. So curious to see what that one's about. Next up, we've got an Alfred Hitchcock film, and one that I actually haven't seen yet. So this is Jamaica Inn. And so this is, you can see it kind of looks a little different here. It's not technically a Kino Lorber release, it's a Cohen Media release. So it's a part of the Cohen film collection, but Kino sells Cohen. So anyway, this is an early Alfred Hitchcock. This is back in his kind of British days, part of the British era, if you will. So this is 1939, and it's sort of this story about a group of criminals. They're kind of like shipwreckers, kind of marauders who go and steal stuff and kind of make ships sink and all this stuff. And Maureen O'Hara is this woman who kind of realizes what's going on and seems to, again, I haven't seen this, but it seems like she's kind of initially aghast at what they're doing, but then might get roped into it. But I always, I'm a big fan of Alfred Hitchcock, so I've been working through some of his slightly more obscure movies, or at least lesser known films. I don't know if you could really consider this obscure, but some of his lesser known films, so I'm interested to check this one out. Next up, we've got a French film, so this is Jetem, Jetem. This is 1968, I believe. And this was another one that I've not seen this, it's a blind buy, and it's another one like Deluge and a few of the others that I had never even heard of before this sale. But reading kind of the little blurb about it, it sounds super interesting. It seems like sort of this variation or a take on kind of a time travel movie, but it's sort of like I don't know, like it reminded me of Quantum Leap. So Quantum Leap being the show about the guy who kind of jumps into other people's bodies through time, and he kind of has to live through some of their experiences before jumping or quantum leaping to another person in another time. This one it sounds like a guy sort of doing that, except rather than jumping to other people, he's jumping to different points in his own life, so in his own past, and so he's kind of being forced to relive memories and relationships and experiences that he's had, and he's kind of stuck in this perpetual time jumping. And so that sounded really interesting. We'll kind of see what it ends up being like, but sounded pretty cool, so I wanted to check it out. Next up, we've got Judgment at Nuremberg. So this is a film that I have seen before, so not a blind buy, and this is a really good movie. Came out in 1961, directed by Stanley Kramer, stars a lot of people, but Spencer Tracy's kind of the big one, but we've also got Burt Lancaster, we've got Judy Garland, Montgomery Clift, like all sorts of people. And this one is sort of this powerful post-war movie, post-World War II, that tells, or kind of is a fictionalized account, not super fictionalized, but a dramatized account, I should say, of the trials at Nuremberg, where kind of war crimes and stuff were being tried. And so it's a really good movie. It's intense, it's kind of dark, it's not, it's a long movie, it's slow paced, but it's really powerful and really engaging, at least for me. I mean, I'm somebody who likes kind of courtroom dramas and those types of things to begin with. I'm also a pretty big fan of Spencer Tracy's work, but this was a really good movie, and I'd seen pieces of it over the years. Kind of recently saw the film in its entirety, and so I was really excited to see that Kino Lorber has the rights to it, and so picked that one up. Next up, we've got King of Hearts. So as you can see, like Jamaica Inn, this is another one of the Cohen film collection. And so this is 1966, I believe. Yes. And so this one is another one I've not seen. Hadn't heard anything about it before seeing it in the list of films in the sale. But it sounds really interesting. Basically, it's this guy who kind of gets roped into, it's like a military film, and I think he's kind of like this ornithologist who gets mistaken for being like an explosives expert, and so he gets sent in on this mission to do something. I don't know if he's supposed to defuse something or blow something up, but he gets sent in, and he ends up in this like town of like crazy people who are doing like all sorts of wild stuff, and it's supposed to have all these unique characters. Sounded a little wacky, but sounded kind of interesting, and so picked it up. Next up, we've got a somewhat newer film, 1986, so the second newest of the bunch so far, and this is Link. Another movie, not seen, hadn't heard of, but it seems right up my alley as kind of one of these ridiculous kind of when animals attack sort of goofy movies. There are a lot. I have like The Day of the Animals and Dogs and all sorts of like weird, especially Kino Lorber releases. And so this one seems to be focused on a grad student who's the student of kind of this eccentric zoology professor, and he has some chimpanzees that he kind of has around his house. I don't know if they are more of like pets or if they're his research animals, but they're around, including one that they call Link. And Link, let's just say, doesn't have a good day one day and kind of goes wild and starts attacking people, or at least it seems. And so it seems like this kind of chimpanzee when animals attack movie. I'm sure it's not good, but it sounds like kind of one of those cheesy, not good movies that I'd probably at least sort of enjoy. And me being a student that studied zoology, sounds like something that's up my alley. And so next up we've got Love with the Proper Stranger. So this is a movie with Natalie Wood and Steve McQueen from 1963. And so another one that I haven't seen. I had heard the name before, but I didn't really know anything about it. But this one seems like it's kind of supposed to be a really good sort of romantic comedy drama about relationships and like pregnancy and things. And I like Natalie Wood quite a bit, and I like Steve McQueen too. And so it's one that I haven't seen that they're both in, so I figured why not. So next up we've got Mississippi Burning. This is another film that I haven't seen before, so it's a blind buy, but I have heard of this. And it stars Gene Hackman and Willem Dafoe as two FBI agents who get sent to the Deep South during the 1960s to investigate the murders of civil rights activists. And so it sounds like a really kind of interesting and powerful sort of police or FBI investigation story, but also seems to have some added drama because I believe our two agents, right, Gene Hackman's character and Willem Dafoe's character, have differing opinions and kind of ideals when it comes to civil rights. And so sounded like an interesting movie, one that I had been meaning to watch for quite a while now, so I was happy to see that it was on the list of movies included in the sale. Next up, we've got Play Misty for Me. So this is a movie that not only stars, but was directed by Clint Eastwood. So this is 1971, and haven't seen it, have heard of it, and it sounded like a very interesting sort of thriller story. Basically, Clint Eastwood plays a DJ on the radio who kind of gets this obsessive fan, and she'll like frequently call in and ask him to play a certain song, and then he agrees to meet her, and they sort of have a relationship, but then he kind of stops seeing her, and then she gets kind of crazy about it. So it sounds interesting, sounds like something I would probably at least find compelling. And it's another one, again, in plastic here, but another one that has a slipcover, so that's always an added bonus for me. Next up, we've got The Queen of Spades. So this is a movie, at least a title, that I know is used for a lot of different movies, but this is the 1949 version of The Queen of Spades. And so it sounds interesting. Again, haven't seen this one, it's a blind buy, but basically it seems like there's this woman who sort of sells her soul to be good at cards, and like be able to kind of con people out of card games, and then she either dies or gets murdered or something, and then she kind of haunts this other person, and so it seems like this very dramatic sort of horror fantasy from the late 40s, so I don't really know too much about it, but the cover caught my eye, the general premise sounded interesting, so I'm curious to check it out. Next up, we've got Raw Courage. So film that I have not seen, blind buy, hadn't heard of it before. One of the newer films from this haul, 1984. And basically it's sort of this survival story. So we've got this group of friends who are out doing like a desert marathon. They're running across like Arizona or something, or 72 miles or something, so more than a regular marathon. And so their whole thing is, can we do this desert marathon? But then they come across this group of like militants basically on motorcycles who then start to hunt them. So it kind of becomes sort of like a most dangerous game kind of deal, or like a variation of like Deliverance, which is interesting because Ronnie Cox is in this movie as well. But it sounded kind of unique. Not necessarily unique, but sounded interesting. And I hadn't heard of it before, and it seems like one that I would have heard of, so I wanted to check it out. Next up, we've got Runaway Train. And so, as you could probably guess, it's about a runaway train. And so we've got a couple prisoners, or like convicts, who are escaped convicts, who sneak onto this train, and then something goes wrong. It becomes a runaway train, and I don't know if they kill all the people that were on it, or everybody like bails out of the train or whatever, but they end up on this train with this one woman, and they're trying to stop it and trying not to die on this runaway train. So this is 1985. It sounded interesting, sounded like kind of one of these crime disaster sort of movies, and so seemed like something I might like. Next up, we've got The Silent Partner. So this is 1978, and we've got Elliot Gould and Christopher Plummer playing a bank teller and a bank robber. And so it seems like this sort of thriller. Again, I haven't seen this one, but it seems like this interesting story about kind of a bank teller trying to prevent this bank robbery without doing anything too physical. It seems like kind of this battle of wits kind of deal, and trying to outwit the bank robber. And so it's this crime thriller. Sounded interesting. I tend to like these like 70s Elliot Gould movies, so curious to check this one out. And then we've got Summer of Sam. So this is a Spike Lee joint. Came out in 1999, and is sort of his take on the Son of Sam murders and kind of serial killings. So this is set in 1970s, late 70s, I think 77 was when Son of Sam was kind of going around. And so 77 New York City, and kind of is this explosive kind of crime story. So basically we've got like a New York City neighborhood during a heat wave with power outages and mistrust, and sounds a little familiar, right? So kind of a crime serial killer period piece variant of some things that he did in other films like Do the Right Thing. I haven't seen this one, but it sounded interesting. I like period pieces. I tend to like movies set in the 70s. And so sounded interesting. Serial killer type movies are usually kind of compelling to me. So I'm really curious to check this one out because, again, it's one of the Spike Lee joints that I have not seen yet. Alright, so that was part 3 of my summer 2021 Blu-ray haul. Be sure to check out part 1 here for an assortment of standard Blu-ray releases, and then part 2 for my Criterion Barnes & Noble sale pickups here. Again, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying any of the Blu-rays I showed you today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. Also, I want to know, did you buy any new movies during Kino Lorber's June Swoon sale? Let me know your thoughts and all your Blu-ray pickups in the comments below. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this haul video, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this, as well as movie reviews. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies, the way life should be.